Suketu was part of the sort of electric shock in the arm that the Jaipur Literature Festival got in its second year, when Suketu, the then Booker Prize winner Kiran Desai, and Salman Rushdie all turned up at the festival. And it turned that one event, these three writers taking a punt on an unknown festival in a provincial Indian city, overnight transformed the festival from being something small that a bunch of friends were putting on into something that immediately began to get media coverage. And without Suketu encouraging Salman and Kiran to come with him, we probably wouldn't be sitting here today. So I think, first of all, a big round of applause for Suketu.
You're much too kind, but thank you.
We're talking today about travel writing, and specifically about how to write a city. Travel writing is one of the most ancient of genres. It, unlike the novel, but like the epic poem, it has appeared simultaneously in different cultures around the world. There are, as well as European travel narratives like Marco Polo or Gerald of Wales, these are early medieval travelers. You get the great Arab travelers, Ibn Dubaya, Ibn Battuta. You get Japanese travelers, Li Po. You get, it's something that appears across the globe, but it appears very early on. Man's earliest writings are narratives of travel, whether the Epic of Gilgamesh, pieced together from tiny cuneiform tablets, or the wanderings of the patriarchs of the Old Testament across the Middle East, or indeed the wanderings of the Pandava brothers across North India. And whether in the form of epic poetry or epic or fiction or non-fiction, the device of a journey, taking the reader from A to B, is in a sense the most obvious and simple way of writing any story, and is something which answers a deep place in mankind's psyche. It's just something that appeals to people in any culture, anywhere in the world. But what we're talking about today is a slightly different form of literature, because if you're trying to write a city, it's in an odd way travel writing which is stationary. It doesn't go from A to B, and therefore requires the writer to come up with his own way, his own maze through a city. And I remember when I was starting City of Gins, puzzling for a long time on how you actually do this thing. How do you put a city onto a page? How do you pin something living and vibrant but stationary into a book? Like Suketu, I first read the many very great books which exist about cities in the post-war period, great books about Indian cities, and like Geoffrey Morehouse's Calcutta, very dated now, but a sort of apocalyptic image of Calcutta in the 1960s and the grip of a sort of Marxist and Naxalite epidemic, almost grinding to a halt. And he painted, and of course it never did grind to a halt, and Calcutta continues to thrive today. But this book of Morehouse, Calcutta is this sort of seething metropolis, this former imperial capital, which is now on the brink of revolution. Jan Morris's great books on Venice. Today there is a whole new wave of writing on cities. So, Katie, just maybe to start, what did you read when you were trying to puzzle how to place Maximum City, this enormous, thriving metropolis? What were the stages that you went to before committing it to paper?
I watched a lot of Hindi movies set in Bombay. I had no idea how to do this. This was my first book. I had a 2-book contract with Knopf and a few other publishers around the world to do a novel and a non-fiction book about Bombay, and the novel was what my heart was really in. At 200 pages, I was all ready to finish it. And the Bombay book just happened almost by accident. I had a chapter in the British magazine Granta about these Hindu-Muslim riots in Bombay. And it almost seemed
which
like an
incidentally
add-on.
it was a debut piece, and knocked the rest of that issue of Granta into the touch in one piece. It was an extraordinary, powerful, and I hope we're going to have a reading for it later.
Well, it also had Arundhati Roy's, the first excerpt from God of Small Things. So a lot of things came out of that one publication on India in 1997. Anyway, I thought I'd go to Bombay for a year, write a quick and dirty book about a quick and dirty city. 7 years later, I delivered a manuscript of 1,667 pages to my editor, Suketu Mehta, who stopped speaking to me for 9 months.
If I could use a profanity on stage, so anyone of sensitive disposition, shut your ears. The story as related to me, Suketu will tell me whether it's made up, but it's a legendary publishing story that after 7 years, this mountain of typescript, Suketu is called to lunch by Suketu Mehta, the great Suketu Mehta, head of Knopf, one of the patriarchs of the publishing, global publishing. And Sunny, certainly with me, was never one to sort of splash out on a restaurant, or indeed in advance, if he could possibly help it. I tended to get taken to the diner around the corner. We'll just go for a quick bite, Will. All my dreams of some grand publishing lunches and elegant caviar and fine wines were swept away as I'll just have a coffee, he said. But on this occasion, he did indeed take Suketu out to a rather better than usual restaurant. Gave him a good glass of wine and said, "Are you sitting comfortably, Suketu?" And he said, "Yes." "Will you promise me something?" "Yes, Uncle Sunny." "Will you promise me you will not write another fucking word of this book?"
That's exactly what happened. Does that mean you don't like it? I said, "No, it's too big. You have to stop now." But when I was writing it, you asked, I really didn't have a model for this. I looked at the V.S. Naipaul trilogy, his non-fiction trilogy on India, which it's an area of darkness, a wounded civilization, and a million mutinies now. I mean, these are not very optimistic titles. But that arc was fascinating because he comes to India. He wasn't born in India, he was born in Trinidad. So he goes to India to kind of discover the homeland of his ancestors, and he hates it. The first 2 books, he really hates the country and everyone he comes across. The third book, in Million Mutinies, he actually comes to some kind of reckoning because for the first time he lets the characters there speak. There's an entire chapter in Million Mutinies which is about a political secretary who moves from Calcutta to Bombay. And the thing is an oral history. He just lets the guy speak. But through that arc, you discover Naipaul's coming to terms with something in himself, the Indian in himself. And you realize that the reason he hates the country so much is that he comes to India as a Brahmin. His father was a priest. And in India, because he's gone beyond the black water, he's just out of caste altogether. No one treats him like a Brahmin. And then he's got to come to some sort of reckoning with himself, his position to the country. So I found that very instructive. Also read the Andre Aciman book, Out of Egypt, which is a wonderful memoir of growing up in Alexandria. The Michael Ondaatje book, Running in the Family, which takes place in Sri Lanka, is my favorite Ondaatje book. So there were these guideposts, but what I wanted to do was a mix of memoir and investigative reportage, and give my readers a sense of the disastrous urban planning which has led to what is now Mumbai. And most of all, I just wanted to go home. I grew up in Bombay, left at the age of 14, and went back 21 years later to a city called Mumbai. And I wanted to see what had happened to the city in my absence.
How did you actually... two different questions. How did you go about the research, one? And two, more difficult, how did you create a narrative out of it? How did you create a book which does go from A to B?
Well, it goes from A to B and then straight to Z and moves to M. Yeah, there's a great story, by the way, of the French filmmaker Godard, who made these very experimental avant-garde films. And once this irate film critic asks Godard, "Mr. Godard, don't you believe that films should have a beginning, a middle, and an end?" And he says, "Yes, but not necessarily in that order." So I think my book was assembled that way. That, how I found people just by following my nose. It was 2.5 years I spent researching, and it was, I was just telling a friend, it was maybe the happiest time of my life because I could just wander. I wasn't teaching. I had a young family, but I wasn't, writing for anyone. I wasn't an assignment for a newspaper or a magazine. I could follow my nose. I got on the trains, listened to conversation, went from person to person, and found the stories in the most extraordinary places. So I'm often asked, my book has a big section about the gangsters in Bombay, the criminal underworld. How did you find the gangsters? Well, it's not like, I put out a hit on someone and I actually found the accountant for the Dawood Ibrahim gang, their comptroller. And he sent to me all these hitmen who would tell me their stories, and he would vouch for me. And they could easily have killed me, and they might have, but this would have pissed off the accountant who was responsible for paying their salaries. So I realized in any large organization, the center of power is the accountant. And yeah, most of it was just accidental. I have a big chapter on Bollywood, which when I knew I couldn't write about Bombay without writing about Bollywood, but no one was going to just give me interviews. So I made myself useful. I became part of the script writing and production teams for some of these Hindi films. And other people I just found through my family. So I think the main thing a writer about cities needs is curiosity and vulnerability. You've got to open yourself up to any kind of experience that happens. And in fact, it's not good to have a plan before you go to a city, because it's out the window.
Were you going about it like a journalist? Did you bring a notebook? Were you interviewing people? Or was it more like as a travel book in which you were keeping a diary at the end of the day? Or was it both? Or what was the...
Well, I definitely had a reporter's notebook. And I always took my laptop with me. Now, and I took it for a reason. As I'd interview people, I'd be typing on my laptop. And any journalist that's worked in India knows that the problem in India isn't getting people to talk, it's getting them to shut up or stick to the topic. So, I'd be interviewing someone about their life, and they'd go off into all these tangents about their uncles and what they think of America and, their thoughts on politics. And I'd still be nodding, but they'd notice that my fingers weren't moving. They weren't dancing with Miss QWERTY on the keyboard. And so I'd nod. And so without my ever having to say anything, they'd get back to what interested me, which got my fingers dancing on the keyboard again. It's the subliminal cues I'd give them. And the advantage with writing on a laptop is I could, while they were going off on the tangents, I could register all kinds of other things, like the decor in the room, the temperature, the expression on the person's face, all this stuff which, I think one thing a reporter needs if you're going to speak to people about sensitive topics is a weak bladder. Because if you're speaking to someone and they're telling you all this stuff, but they're not going to feel comfortable if they see you writing it down. So you listen to them, and then you say, "Excuse me, I've got to go to the bathroom, I've got a weak bladder." In the bathroom, you write down furiously on your notebook. Then you come back, you get some more, and then you go back again. So, yeah. How did you do it, Willie? Now, you did Jane's in a different way. You moved with your family to Delhi, and for you, the book was much more about this historical Delhi, and it's always been this interest of yours.
Correct, and and in a sense that's inherent in the difference between the two cities, Bombay obviously has a rich history, but it's a fantastically contemporary city. It's all about the now. It's Bollywood. It's money. It's the economy. Delhi has this sort of, it's one of those cities like Rome or Cairo, where the ruins and the remains of the dead haunt the living in every way, which is what the idea of the title, the idea of City of Jinns, was that this was, in a sense, a haunted city. And as you drive around modern South Delhi, with these new flyovers and these new rich colonies coming up, the colonies mushroom amid these ruins of sultanates and empires past. And in the middle of the Delhi golf course, there's these enormous tombs that rise. And under the flyovers, there's hammams and caravanserais and Turkish baths and ruins of successive dynasties. And geographically, Delhi does this sort of dance. It starts off in Mehrauli at Lal Kot in the 9th, 10th century. And as successive Sultanate dynasties come, it moves slowly northwards until finally it reaches Shah Jahanabad, its furthest northern point, Old Delhi today. And then the British move it back again to Raisina, beginning its southward march. And ever since then, it's been heading south, fast towards Gurgaon, which is now a megalopolis of its own, of 10 million people. And this extraordinary libertarian creation where there is no planning, where everything is owned by corporations, where you have these fantastic apartments rising up, which are connected to no electricity system, to no sewage system, are not connected by any public transport to anywhere else. And so you have these extraordinary rich buildings gleaming with marble, with huge pools of sewage outside them, and sort of people, the people inside the apartments moving off in their Bentleys and their Mercedes and their fast cars, and the people who service the apartments sort of wandering over wastelands to get to them. It's a very, very surreal place.
But you've got this gift for making history really riveting, to select the stories from the archives, from all the research that you do, that resonate with what's happening in the present, but you do an enormous amount of research. So how do you actually pick out the relevant stories and fashion them into a narrative? Because City of Jinns, for you, was also a very personal book.
Well, very interesting hearing you say. Fun enough, we've been friends for 10 years. I don't think we've ever actually sat on a panel and done this together before.
You bought me an ice cream once after my grant. You promised me dinner, and then he takes me to the shop in London and says, we need to get you some food. Do you have any ice cream?
Last night when I did it, I somehow forgot my wallet. So it's an old Scottish trick. Anyway, it's a different story.
We Gujaratis are familiar with those tricks.
The Gujarati replied by taking me to a really cheap dive and buying macaroni cheese and mac. Anyway, that's a different story. No, because I didn't realize, and you describing it just then, was that this view was a particularly happy period of your life with a young family doing what you're, and this is very much the same period for me in Delhi, going out there with my then girlfriend, marrying in the middle of writing the book, and having a young family as I'm writing the book. And again, looking back, an incredibly carefree time when I had enough money from the advance to take it quite easy, living on a phenomenally low, I think first year in Delhi, I remember £6,000 kept me going a whole year. And yet we were able to, life seemed very easy at that time. And I suppose both our books have that. This is a discovery of a favored city, but being given the time to really breathe it in and to really inhale both Bombay and the noxious fumes of Delhi to our heart's content. And I came up with a kind of, the idea behind Jinns was this idea of it being a haunted city, and that not only were these separate cities of Delhi, famously 8 cities of Delhi on this plain, but that the remains of different periods were still alive in different bits. So if you went to the Lodi Gardens, you'd see the old colonels of the independence generation strutting around with their sticks. Head to Old Delhi, there'd be the last Mughal calligraphers in their frock coats doing lovely Urdu poetry. head to Nizamuddin, and you were back in the Sultanate with Sufis and medieval poetry and Amar Khusro being sung. Head to Nigambod Ghat, and you had the sadhus still sitting on the banks where the Puranas are meant to have emerged from the river Yamuna. And there was this very real sense, and I set it as a sort of task to, in a sense, place different bits of contemporary Delhi in their historical setting. And the book, in an odd way, it's a diary of a year and starts at the end of the monsoon and goes through to the next monsoon. But it goes backward chapter by chapter. So just as I described, it starts at partition, or the Sikh riots of 1984, then partition, then the Twilight, then the Mughals, then the Sultanate, and right back to the mythological origins of the city in the Mahabharat and Indraprastha. And I, like you, had a mixture of both sort of diary and reportage. I would go out and interview someone with a notebook, but I would also keep a record of the weather, the daily goings-on around me. And I had a card index for the main characters, so my taxi driver, Bhavinder Singh, my landlady. Maybe I should, we're both going to do short reads, maybe I should just give you a flavor. One of the differences between Suketu and I's books, I think, is that my book was written very young. I was 22 when I wrote this. It's very much a student, it's almost a just out of college book. Well, you were...
I was in my 30s.
You were in your 30s, and I think that does show very much in the tone. But you'll get an impression of the flippancy of this book from this passage. This is about my taxi driver. Bhavinder Singh, son of Punjab Singh, prince of taxi drivers, may your moustache never grow grey, nor your liver cave in with cirrhosis, nor your precious Hindustan ambassador ever again crumple in a collision like the one we had with the van carrying mango fruity drink. During my first year in Delhi, I remember thinking that the traffic had seemed anarchic and alarming, but by my second, I came to realize that it was in fact governed by very strict rules. Right of way belonged to the driver of the largest vehicle. Buses gave way to heavy trucks, ambassadors gave way to buses, and bicyclists gave way to everything except pedestrians. On the road, as in so many other aspects of Indian life, might is right. Yet, Bhavinder Singh is an individualist who believes in the importance of asserting himself. While circumstances may force him to defer to buses and lorries, he's never seen the necessity of giving way to the tinny new Maruti vans, which, though taller than his ambassador, are not so heavily built. After all, Mr. Singh is a kshatriya by caste, a warrior, and like his ancestors, he's keen to show he's afraid of nothing. He disdains such cowardly acts as looking in his mirrors or using his indicators. His ambassador is his chariot, his klaxon, his sword. Weaving into the oncoming traffic, playing chicken with the other taxis. Bhavinder Singh is a Raja of the road. Or rather, was. 1 month after our arrival in Delhi, Mr. Singh and I had an accident. Taking a road junction with more phlegm than usual, we careered into a Maruti van, impaling it in its bows, so that it bled mango fruity drink all over Mr. Singh's bonnet. No one was hurt, and Mr. Singh, strangely elated by his kill, took it stoically. Mr. William, he said, in my life 6 times have I crashed, and on not one occasion have I ever been killed. Although I'm devoted to him, my wife Olivia is keen to point out that Mr. Singh is in some ways a slightly unattractive character. A Punjabi Sikh, he is the Essex man of the East. He chews pan and spits beetle juice out of the window, leaving a red go-fast stripe along the car's right flank. He utters incoherent whoops of joy as he drives rickshaws onto the pavement or sends herds of paper boys flying into a ditch. He leaps out of his taxi to urinate at traffic lights, and he scratches his groin as he talks. Like Essex man, he is a lecher. His eyes follow the saris up and down the Delhi avenues. Plump Sikh girls riding side saddle on motorbikes are a particular distraction. Twice a week when Olivia is not in the car, he offers to drive me to GB Road, the Delhi red light district. Just looking, he suggests. Delhi ladies very good, having breasts like mangoes. Yet he has his principles. Like his English counterpart, he is a believer in hard work. He finds it hard to understand the beggars who congregate at the lights. Why are these people not working, he says. They have 2 arms and 2 legs. They're not handicrafted. Handicrafted? Missing leg, perhaps, or only 1 ear. You mean handicapped? Yes, handicrafted. Sikh people not like this. Sikh people's working hard, earning money, buying car. Ignoring the bus hurtling towards us, he turns around and winks an enormous wink. Afterwards, Sikh people's drinking whiskey, looking television, eating tandoori chicken, and going GB Road. A more grown-up passage.
And now for something completely different. So I'm going to read out two short sections which are the contrapuntal views of Bombay. I went back to, among other things, to look at what had happened to my city after the very bloody Hindu-Muslim riots of 92, 93. And I got friendly with a bunch of young activists in the Hindu nationalist Shiv Sena party. So this is a scene from one of my earliest encounters with them. What does a man look like when he's on fire? I asked Sunil. It was December 1996, and I was sitting in a high-rise apartment in this suburb of Andheri with a group of men from the Hindu nationalist Shiv Sena party. They were telling me about the riots of 92-93 that followed the destruction of the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya. The two other Shiv Sena men, with Sunil, looked at each other. Either they didn't trust me yet, or they were not drunk enough on my cognac. I wasn't there. The Sena didn't have anything to do with the rioting, one man said. Sunil would have none of this. He put down his glass and said, I'll tell you, I was there. A man on fire gets up, falls, runs for his life, falls, gets up, runs. He addressed me. You couldn't bear to see it. It is horror. Oil drips from his body. His eyes become huge, huge. The white shows. White, white. You touch his arm like this. He flicked his arm. The white shows. It shows especially on the nose. He rubbed his nose with two fingers as if scraping off the skin. Oil drips from him. Water drips from him. White, white all over. Those were not days for thought, he continued. We 5 people burnt one Mussalman. At 4 a.m., after we heard of the incident at Radhabai Chaul, a mob assembled, the likes of which I have never seen. Ladies, gents, they picked up any weapon they could. Then we marched to the Muslim side. We met a paonwala on the highway, on a bicycle. I knew him. He used to sell me bread every day. Sunil held up a piece of bread from the pav bhaji he was eating. I set him on fire. We poured petrol on him and set him on fire. All I thought was, this is a Muslim. He was shaking. He was crying. I have children. I have children. I said, when your Muslims were killing the Hindus at Radhabai Chaul, did you think of your children? That day, we showed them what Hindu Dharma is. So I had a number of these encounters, and I met religious rioters, I met gangsters, and for a while, I sat in a policeman's office as they tortured people in front of me, and I took notes on my laptop. So it made me deeply sad that this city that I had left had become this incredibly violent place where human life was so cheap, where both the state and these non-state actors competed in this kind of torture and murder. And I kept looking for hope. And I found hope in the most unexpected place. The manager of Bombay's suburban railway system was recently asked...
This is almost the final scene of the book, isn't it?
Yeah. The manager of Bombay's suburban railway system was recently asked when the system would improve to a point where it could carry its 6 million daily passengers in comfort. Not in my lifetime, he answered. Certainly, if you commute into Bombay, you are made aware of the precise temperature of the human body as it curls around you on all sides, adjusting itself to every curve of your own. A lover's embrace was never so close. My friend Asad bin Saif works in an institute for secularism, moving tirelessly among the slums, cataloguing numberless communal flare-ups and riots, seeing firsthand the slow destruction of the social fabric of the city. Asad is from Bhagalpur in Bihar, site not only of some of the worst communal rioting in the nation, but also of a gory incident where the police blinded a group of petty criminals with knitting needles and acid. Assad, of all people, has seen humanity at its worst. I asked him if he feels pessimistic about the human race. Not at all, he responded. Look at the hands from the trains. If you are late for work in the morning in Bombay, and you reach the station just as the train is leaving the platform, you can run up to the packed compartments and find many hands stretching out to grab you on board, unfolding outward from the train like petals. As you run alongside the train, you will be picked up and some tiny space will be made for your feet on the edge of the open doorway. The rest is up to you. You will probably have to hang on to the door frame with your fingertips, being careful not to lean out too far lest you get decapitated by a pole placed too close to the tracks. But consider what has happened. Your fellow passengers already packed tighter than cattle are legally allowed to be. Their shirts already drenched in sweat in the badly ventilated compartment, having stood like this for hours, retain an empathy for you. Know that your boss might yell at you or cut your pay if you miss this train, and will make space where none exists to take one more person with them. And at the moment of contact, they do not know if the hand that is reaching for theirs belongs to a Hindu or Muslim or Christian or Brahmin or untouchable, or whether you were born in this city or arrived only this morning, or whether you live in Malabar Hill or New York or Jogeshwari, whether you're from Bombay or Mumbai or New York. All they know is that you're trying to get to the city of gold, and that's enough. Come on board, they say. We'll adjust.
If Suketu's book has established itself as the great book of Bombay, the great book on Delhi was written, I think, in the 1920s, a book called Twilight in Delhi by Ahmed Ali. And what intrigued me arriving as this newly liberated student moving to Delhi in 1989 was that so much that Ahmed Ali had recorded was invisible. He records this elegant, beautiful Mughal capital in the last stages of sort of refined decay, of all these old families who once owned huge estates reduced to a last Haveli, no money, selling off heirlooms. And yet the city I was living in was this sort of Punjabi metropolis, full of sort of musty and spirit and vodka shots, but lacking any elegance at all. It was a kind of far from being a sort of declining duchess. It was a nouveau riche heiress, glib with glittery gold and full of life, but far from what Ahmed Ali described. And so I decided to go to Karachi to find Ahmed Ali and talk to him, because he was still alive. He was a very old man in his 80s. And of course, the reason for this dissonance was partition. In 1947, India and Pakistan split in two, and most of the old Mughal elite of Delhi went or were driven out and took refuge in Karachi. And the landless Hindus and Sikhs made homeless by partition, arriving in huge numbers in bullock carts from the Punjab, arriving initially in tent cities on the ridge in Delhi and gradually being placed in new colonies like Defence Colony or Punjabi Bagh. What I hadn't realized until I went to Karachi was that much of old Delhi had reformed in Karachi, and the kebab shops, for example, which had been around the Jama Masjid, reformed in the same order in Burns Road in Karachi, and there was this sort of Delhi in exile existing, which I had no idea about, which I'd never read about. And I had this revelatory conversation with Ahmed Ali, which for me is was the most revealing of all that I'd done, and yet it took place not in Delhi, but in Karachi. Ahmed Ali was there to meet us. He wore severe black-rimmed glasses, above which sprouted a pair of thin grey eyebrows. He slurred his consonants and had the slightly limp wrist and effete manner of one who modelled himself on a Bloomsbury original. His hair was the colour of wood ash. For a man once seen as a champion of Delhi's culture, a bulwark of Eastern civilization, against the seepage of Western influence, Ahmed Ali now cut an unexpectedly English figure, with his clipped accent and tweed jacket and old leather elbow patches. He could have passed off successfully as a clubland character from a Noel Coward play. But despite his comfortable, well-to-do appearance, Ahmed Ali was an angry man. Over the hours I spent with him, he spluttered and spat like a well-warmed frying pan. First occasion was when I inadvertently mentioned that he was now a citizen of Pakistan. Poppycock, balderdash, he said. I was always against Jinnah. Never had any bloody interest in Pakistan. Steady on, said his friend Shanul Haq. The devil, said Ali. Pakistan's not a country, never was. It's a damned hodgepodge. It's not your country or my country. He was shouting at Shanul Haq now. It's a country of a damn bunch of feudal lords, robbers, bloody murderers, kidnappers. The outburst spluttered out into silence. But, I ventured, didn't you opt for Pakistan? Stayed in Delhi if you wanted to. There was another explosion. I opted for Pakistan, I did not. I was the visiting professor in Nanking when the blasted partition took place. The bloody swine of Hindus wouldn't let me go back home, so... What do you mean? I went and saw the Indian ambassador in Peking. Bloody swine said I couldn't return. Said it was a question of Hindu against Muslim and there was nothing he could do. I was caught in China and had nowhere to go. Careful, said Shanul Haq, seeing the state his friend had worked himself up into. So how did you end up in Karachi, I asked. When my salary in Nanking was stopped, I found my way to some friends in Hong Kong. They put me on an amphibious plane to Karachi. Where else could I go if I couldn't go back to Delhi? Ali had now ceased to quiver with rage and was now merely very cross. I never opted for Pakistan, he said, gradually regaining his poise. The civilization I belonged to, the civilization of Delhi, came into being through the mingling of two different cultures, Hindu and Muslim. That civilization flourished for 1,000 years undisturbed until certain people came along and denied that that great mingling had ever taken place. Views like that can hardly have made you popular here, I said. They never accepted me in Pakistan, damn it. I've been weeded out. They don't publish my books. They've deleted my name. When Twilight in Delhi arrived at the Karachi customs from India, they sent it back. Said the book was about the forbidden city from across the border, implied that the culture was foreign and somehow subversive. In that case, couldn't you go back to Delhi, I said. Couldn't you reapply for Indian citizenship? Now, no country is my country, said Ali. Delhi is dead. The city that was, the language, the culture, everything I knew is finished. It's true, said Shanul Haq. I went back 13 years after partition. Already everything was different. I stayed at a new hotel, the Ambassador, which I only later realized had been built on top of a graveyard where several of my friends were buried. In my mahalla, everyone used to know me, but suddenly I was a stranger. My Haveli was split into 10 parts and occupied by Punjabis. My wife's house had become a temple. Delhi was no longer the abode of the Delhi Walla. Even the walls had changed. It was very depressing. Before partition, said Ali, Delhi was a unique city. Although it was already very poor, still it preserved its high culture. That high culture filtered down even to the streets. Everyone was part of it. Even the milkmen could quote Mir and Dag. The prostitutes would sing Persian songs and recite Hafiz. They may not have been able to read and write, but they could remember the poets. And the language, said Shanul Haq. You cannot conceive how chaste Delhi Urdu was. And how rich, said Ali. Every mahalla had its own expressions. The language used by our ladies was quite distinct from that used by the men. Now the language has shrunk. So many words are lost. We talked for an hour about the Delhi of their childhood and youth. We talked of the eunuchs and the Sufis and the pigeons and the poets, of the monsoon picnics in Mehrauli and the jinn who fell in love with Ahmed Ali's aunt. We talked of the sweetmeat sellers who stayed open until 3 in the morning, the sorcerers who could cast spells over a whole mahalla, the possessed women who used to run vertically up the Zanana walls, and the miraculous cures effected by Hakim Ajmal Khan. The old men swam together through great oceans of nostalgia before finally coming ashore on a strand of melancholy. But all of that is no more, said Ali. All that made Delhi special has been uprooted and dispersed. Now it is a carcass without a soul, said Shanul Haq. I am a fossil, said Ali, and Shanul Haq is on his way to becoming a fossil. But nevertheless, I insisted, if you both love Delhi so much, wouldn't you like to see it just one more time? I will never see that town again, said Ali. Once I was invited to give some lectures in Australia. There was some mechanical fault on the plane and it was diverted to Delhi. The plane landed, but I refused to get out. I said, I'm not getting out, I don't have to. You call your damn chairman, but I'm not putting 1 foot of mine on that soil which was sacred to me and now has been desecrated. They got the entire staff of the airport there to get me out, but I didn't move. How could I? How could I revisit that which once was mine and now was no longer mine? When they asked why I was behaving as I was, I simply sat in my seat and quoted Mir Taki Mir at them. What matters it, O breeze, if now has come the spring, when I have lost them both, the garden and my nest? What happened, I asked. The swine were all Punjabis, said Ali. Tell you the truth, I don't think they understood a bloody word I said. You've carried on with cities. You have 2 city projects bubbling on your hob, so to speak.
Yeah, I like cities. As Woody Allen says, I'm at 2 with nature. So cities are, I like cities because I like people. So after the Bombay book, I swore I was going to go back to my novel, and I said, I'm not going to write another fucking city book again. It consumes my life. I'll only do it if I get very drunk. Well, I got very drunk, and it's now the 8th or 9th year of a book on New York that I've been writing, which picks up where I left off in Bombay, because I got to New York when I was 14. It's focused on immigrants, and I've been meeting all sorts of people in the worlds of New York, high and low. But I become interested in these processes of cities, and I go to lots of conferences. I meet architects and urban planners and who are concerned with the physical structure of cities, the built environment. And as a writer, I'm concerned with the people who live in the buildings. Coming out this fall, it starts in Italy and goes around with a short book-length essay about cities. It's called The Secret Life of Cities. And it's about migration, alienation, and community in the world's cities. So I'll read out a short section which is about love and cities. I loved well those cities, sings Walt Whitman. Writers are obsessed with complex cities because we are obsessed with the complex people in them. What is the city but the people, asks Shakespeare. Dickens, Baudelaire, Mahfouz loved well those cities. But the best writing being done about cities today is by outsiders. The story of New York today is being told not by people born there, but by Kiran Desai, Juno Diaz, Jhumpa Lahiri, Gary Steingart, migrants all. Unless, like Italo Calvino, that most humane urbanist, you write about invisible cities. The prose in his great Invisible Cities is so general and spacious and inscrutable, it could mean anything to anyone, that it allows you to fashion your own city like the Emperor Kubla Khan in the book. Besides Marco Polo and the Khan, there are no individuals in the book, none in any of his invisible cities. There are only assemblages of people. A real city that could have sprung out of Calvino's book is the abandoned city of Fatehpur Sikri near Agra, where the Mughal Emperor Akbar shifted his entire court for 14 years, then abandoned it for reasons that are still mysterious. Was it because the riverbed had dried up? Was it over a woman? Why did the ghosts leave Fatehpur Sikri? Perhaps because they were ghosts to begin with. All this was explained to me by my friend Salman Rushdie as he showed me the site where he was researching his novel Enchantress of Florence. This half-ruined city was perfect for his imagination. He could reconstruct the walls, decorate them with exquisite inlays and fabulous carvings with his fiction. The gaps in the historical record, Rushdie noted, are where the fiction writer can come in. Calvino's Marco Polo has been speaking to Kubla Khan about invisible cities for many days and nights. Dawn had broken when he said, "Sire, now I have told you about all the cities I know. There is still one of which you never speak." Marco Polo bowed his head. "Venice," the Khan said. Marco smiled. "What else do you believe I have been talking to you about?" Marco is talking about the city he loves the most, and his tale is infected with the sadness of lost love. Every lost love must be mourned, no matter how necessary the loss. Every love sacrifices itself for the one that comes after it. So I must leave a city as I leave a lover to go to another. I leave with promises that I will return, although she will be a different woman by then. Memories, images, once they are fixed in words, are erased, Polo said. Perhaps I am afraid of losing Venice all at once if I speak of it, or perhaps, speaking of other cities, I have already lost it, little by little. The city has many layers, many worlds, which change at dizzying speed. We walk on layers of the past without even realizing it. What does it do to the human mind to have all the landmarks of childhood change overnight? How much can we live with such constant change in our environment before we begin to get jittery, uneasy, waspish? I have been used to seeing the sea from this angle through these buildings for a long time. In 6 months, that's closed off to me, and now all I see is the road, those cars coming and going that I didn't grow up with. I turn my head, and there's another building full of 10,000 people hemming me and crowding me. Constant change destroys your faith in your ability to remember the past. You begin doubting your memories. Each of us has an individual emotional map of the cities we inhabit. I have a secret life in cities, layered like civilizations with layers of memory. Each New York corresponds to a woman I've loved. Greenwich Village was the New York of N, a Dominican beauty queen who was on the run from her powerful ex-husband's bodyguards. Park Slope was Kay, the photographer who I carried over a puddle in Prospect Park one night to see the full moon. The East Village was where I made 2 children with my wife. When I break up with these women, I avoid those parts of the city. I take other routes to work. I might run into her, once so close, held and called and spoken to several times a day. And now, the strangest of the strangers walking down the street. She has departed with the best part of me, and I have turned into a ghost city. I am Fatehpur Sikri after the Emperor Akbar and his entire court have vanished. When I moved to New York, the keenest connection that I felt with Bombay concerned a girl I was in love with, although she didn't know it since I had barely spoken to her twice in my life. Late at night, after everybody in my house was asleep, my parents and my young sisters, I would put Hindi songs on the new stereo my father had installed in the living room. I would lie on a mattress and, very softly, play Lata Mangeshkar, whose voice soothed me into sleep, sent me aloft and back to the lost country, the faraway girl. Music is the cheapest airline.
Over to you, Doctor. Questions?
Have you ever considered writing in any other language than English? And a second part of this question is, do you think that anything is lost when you write about a city where you are writing in a language which is not the language of the city?
Well, for your first question, I write in Gujarati, but only jokes. For a while now, I've been working on a new translation of Gandhiji's Atmakatha, because it's a very different, the autobiography of Mahatma Gandhi, which is a very different book in the original Gujarati, which is the sense you get from the titles of the two books. In English, it's called The Story of My Experiments with Truth. In Gujarati, it's called Autobiography. So in Gujarati, it's this wonderful, concise, funny book about this very vulnerable man. And the English was translated by two of his political secretaries back in the 1930s, so I want to do it again. Your second question, I went back to Bombay and did write in one of the languages of Bombay, which is English. The great thing about Bombay is that it's a city of many, many languages, which is shown in its name. You know, I'll always call it Bombay when speaking in English. When I speak in Gujarati or Marathi, I'll call it Mumbai, and when I'm speaking Hindi, I'll call it Bombay. And the great thing about that city is no one name, no one language has to be privileged above any other.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Zer from the University of Wyoming, and I want to thank you both for honoring the Rocky Mountains with your presence. I have a question about the section in Maximum City where we've traveled to look at dancing girl bars, and we stay with one young woman, a pretty troubled young woman, for a long time. I very much appreciate that passage, and I teach it in a course called Sex in the International City. I want to ask you about composing that section and trying to avoid being a voyeur or sounding like just another customer, admiring this young woman's talents. And I'm also curious if what kind of process you went through to try to sidestep the male gaze and how you felt it was successful.
You know, when you approach a remarkably attractive young woman, it's hard to avoid the male gaze. Being male, I gazed. But the difference is when you get to know someone over 2.5 years, then you see that person when she's vulnerable. You know, she comes to your house, you feed her. When her long-lost father comes back after 10 years, you're the person she invites. And it's just a matter of getting to know all the levels of a person. And this person who I call Mona Lisa in the book was this bar dancer who became one of my closest friends, and I certainly was her closest friend. And yes, there was an attraction which was never acted upon, but it was this complex relationship of friendship and a narrator and a chronicler. And I'll tell you a story about her reaction to the book. So at the launch of my book in Bombay, she came to the party and she had a great time. She was meeting all these Bollywood movie stars and important officials and journalists and so forth. And I gave her a copy of the book, and this was the first time she was reading this section about herself. So she goes back to her home and reads it all night, and then in the morning, I get a series of texts from her saying, "What have you done? You've written about my entire life in this, and you know everything, my sex life, and how my parents, and you've just laid my life bare for the world to know." And I felt like shit. And writing nonfiction, you know, about characters, you never know the effect it'll have on your characters. So I didn't respond to her. Then that same afternoon, I started getting another series of texts from her, which said, "Well, I knew you were writing a book. You were sitting in front of me with a laptop the whole time. And you never lied. Everything you've written about me in this chapter is true. And then, besides, why should I be ashamed? Because this is my life, this is how I make my living, this is how I support my family, and why should I be ashamed of it? So can I drive you to the airport tomorrow morning?" And something beautiful had happened, where in reading about her life...
She didn't try and throw you out the car or anything, no?
Sorry?
She didn't try and throw you out the car.
She took me to the airport. And just she had come to terms with her life in reading about it, and now her life is celebrated. So I think that's the way. The way to get beyond the gaze is just to stick with the person and get to know them in the fullness of their humanity.
Yeah, gentleman with the spectacles.
Will have to be the last question.
If you were going to ask.
No. I was just telling William this is the last question.
Okay, thanks. The question to both of you, really. As a poet, if you are writing about something, how important it is for you to be authentic and historically accurate? You see, if you are a historian and you are writing something, you'll make sure it's historically accurate. But when you are wearing the hat of a poet, is it important to be historically accurate? I beg to submit what you wrote about Delhi. If I didn't know about Delhi, it would have portrayed a completely incorrect image in my mind. I mean, I didn't mean to criticize, but is that important to be historically accurate? That's the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're writing non-fiction, it's got to be non-fiction. You can't make things up. If you want to make things up, you like Salman Rushdie, you write you write the version of Fatipur Sikri in the Enchantress of Florence, and you reinvent it in your own head. But if you're writing non-fiction, you take notes and you make it as accurate as you possibly can, as you would do with a political report or a piece of journalism. I mean, there are exceptions to that. I think there's a genre of comic travel writing where it doesn't where it makes no pretense of being a serious assessment of anything. And a Bill Bryson book on Middle America, I mean, we don't mind if he's made up some of the dialogue because it's basically comic and that's its point. Equally, there are works by Bruce Chatwin, like the songlines, which very consciously float between fiction and non-fiction, and do so manifestly and as the aim of the book. But I think for most non-fiction, you've got to be very strict with yourself, and you take down dialogue, and you may cut it into shape, but you don't make it up.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Non-fiction is hard work. I really envy my novelist friends who can sit in nice writers' colonies and make shit up. I've got to go trudging in the slums, in the hot sun, and get people who don't want to talk. And then, so I researched Maximum City in Bombay, and then went to Brooklyn and wrote the book, from my notes. And then I'd see that certain things were missing. So if there were two scenes in the life of the bar dancer, and one was this story about when she was 14, there was this other story when she was 17, and I realized I'd forgotten to ask her the intervening years, and with many of the people in my book, because they live in the shadow worlds, I couldn't go back and ask them follow-up questions. So what do I do? And I realized I could easily have made up a scene. That's the connecting scene. No one would be the wiser, because none of these people are going to talk to reviewers or journalists, and I could easily make it up. And indeed, many writers that I admire, like Joseph Mitchell, have admitted to rounding out characters or making composites. But then I realized if I made up that one scene, then what was to prevent me from making the whole damn thing up and calling it a novel? I just put in too much work to then play around with the truth. And if readers didn't get the connecting scene, then they didn't get it. They just have to surmise it. So I think it's really dangerous territory for a writer of nonfiction to put in this fiction, unless you come clean with your reader at the beginning and say that this is this other genre and some of it's true and some of it's not.
There's another travel writer called Rory McLean, who starts his wonderful journey through Eastern Europe with the scene where a pig falls out of a tree and kills his uncle, and that is, in a sense, you're being told that you're not going to get the straightforward truth out of this book, and after that, that's okay. But you do have to do something. If you're going to make stuff up, you have to indicate it. Anyway, I think we've run out of time, so please, a big hand for Suketu Mehta.
Thank you to both William and Suketu. That was really a brilliant session. A real honor to hear you read your books in person. We will now do more readings over lunchtime. There are 3 other authors.